There's something I noticed. Whenever the subject of philosophy comes up in conversation with people, they tend to express one of three distinct attitudes. I'm sure you've encountered these yourself, so today I want to take a closer look at each one of them. The standard and most common attitude towards philosophy is one of simple ignorance or disinterest. You will find it commonly expressed in statements such as, "I'm not really interested in philosophy. Philosophy sounds interesting, but I'm too busy pursuing other things. I'm sure philosophy is important, but I prefer to leave it to the experts in the field." In most cases, I regard this attitude as perfectly respectable. In fact, having some such attitude among most people is an inherent aspect of living in a free society with a division of labor. Not everyone can be a professional philosopher, or even be interested in explicit philosophic questions, given the endless variety of other productive fields a man may pursue. Not to mention the fact that if we were all professional philosophers, everyone would simply starve. So people who end up with such an attitude are not necessarily to blame. However, they are entirely left at the mercy of those who do meddle in philosophy. Why? Well, philosophy will be at work in a man's life, even if he remains mostly ignorant of the subject. As an analogy, you may be ignorant of the law of gravity, even though your entire life will be affected by it. If a man is to remain alive, he has to act on the basis of some idea about the nature of the world and his understanding of it. Even if he spends his whole life without explicitly considering any philosophic issue, he will still absorb certain philosophic ideas from his surroundings, which will be instrumental in shaping him and the life he's going to have. Unfortunately, it is very difficult for people with this disinterested attitude to detect any errors in the philosophic ideas they come to accept. The very abstract nature of philosophic principles is rarely accompanied by any immediate evidence to prove their actual validity and value to man's life, something which is not the case in most other fields. For example, you may know nothing whatsoever about farming and food production, but if your local grocer sells you rotten food, your eyes and stomach can provide you with immediate evidence that there is something wrong here. By contrast, if you come to buy into mistaken or bad ideas, you may go on living without noticing that your new daily intellectual regimen consists of stuffing your mind with poison. As a consequence, the majority of people end up passively going along with the intellectual trends set by philosophers, regardless whether they are right or wrong, good or evil. Now, I assume by the fact that you're watching this video, your attitude towards philosophy is not a disinterested one. However, even among those who are interested and do know philosophy, there are two widespread but mistaken attitudes which I want to call to your attention. The first of these two we may call the "all philosophy is good" attitude. It is characterized by an almost indiscriminate embrace of all sorts of philosophies, including different religions. People with this attitude are often well-read and pride themselves with having gathered valuable bits of wisdom from all sorts of different sources. They can read books from the most opposed philosophic systems and yet invest all of them with some merit and value. Then they emerge from these books with a series of disconnected aphorisms, which they enjoy sharing with others. It doesn't bother them that many of these anecdotes are incompatible or outright contradict each other. By the mere fact of dealing with abstract ideas, such as the meaning of life or the nature of the universe, all philosophies and religions, regardless of their content, acquire some kind of value on this view. And conversely, all philosophers and spiritual leaders acquire some kind of virtue. Now, I'm pretty sure you must have met many such types. I certainly have, especially in continental Europe. But why would anyone come to hold such an indiscriminate view of philosophy? Well, it turns out that this attitude towards philosophy is itself derived from certain philosophic ideas. Indeed, there are several mistaken premises at work and common to most people with this attitude. But I want to focus on the one premise they all share. A premise originated by perhaps the most famous of all philosophers, Socrates. Socrates believed the cause of evil behavior among men is simply lack of knowledge. And if only people were knowledgeable enough, then they would not act viciously. Now, don't misunderstand. He's not merely saying that knowledge is necessary for virtue, which is perfectly sensible, but that knowledge is sufficient for virtue. In other words, if you get adequately educated, you automatically become a good person. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates attests to this view on several different occasions. I'll be quoting. "Ignorance is the cause of evil. For a man is good for that wherein he is intelligent. It is knowledge of good and evil which makes a man happy. For knowledge is a noble and governing power which is never swayed to govern evilly." So the idea is that once you know something to be right, you will automatically act on it. And there is no such thing as willful evil. Only evil caused by ignorance. On this view, the existence of an evil genius becomes an impossibility. In fact, a contradiction in terms. Now, I assume you understand this view is simply demonstrably false, and that human beings are quite capable of evading an issue they know to be true, or to go against their own better judgment, or commit deliberate acts of destruction, including self-destruction. Of course, Socrates never had the chance to learn about the life and work of very educated men, such as Lenin or Dr. Joseph Goebbels. So his error is an innocent one, but it is an error. And in spite of being so demonstrably false, this notion of equating knowledge with virtue is still present in a lot of people's thinking, and is the main contributing factor to the all philosophy is good attitude. If one regards a philosopher as a lover of wisdom, which is the Greek meaning of the term, and then accepts Socrates' view of equating virtue with knowledge, then a philosopher emerges as a lover of virtue, i.e., a good person. Thus, it becomes virtually impossible to condemn a philosopher, no matter how irrational his ideas, or to connect these ideas with the disasters they cause when put into practice. I know this all philosophy is good attitude and the underlying premise of equating knowledge and virtue may seem harmless, but they actually do have many bad and often devastating consequences. I'll just mention in passing today's bubble in higher education and the eagerness among many Western governments to subsidize it. After graduating from high school, I remember everyone telling me, "You have to go to college." Not, "You have to go to college to become a lawyer or a doctor," but simply, "You have to go to college." Period. It doesn't matter whether you know what you want to do in your life or not, but if you just go to college, then you'll be fine. Why? Because virtue is knowledge, and whatever you learn there will be good for you. That's the fundamental premise behind this sort of advice, which unfortunately too many young people are following. And after spending several of their formative years and large sums of money to pick up some degree or other, a lot of them end up working jobs they could have just as well started after high school. Aside from this bubble in higher education, I can think of several more bad consequences resulting from the widespread acceptance of Socrates' principle and the all philosophy is good attitude. But I would like to hear if you can come up with some of your own. If you do, please share your thoughts in the comment section. Before concluding with the all philosophy is good attitude, I would like to point out one more thing. If I came to accept the idea of all philosophies and religions possessing truth and value, no matter how blatantly they contradict each other, I would have to conclude that none of them have any truth or value, and studying any or all of them is just a waste of time. Which is a perfect segue to the third and last attitude I want to take a look at today. This attitude we can give a whole bunch of names. Philosophy is BS. It's just a bunch of hot air. It's a useless game played by ivory tower intellectuals. But I'm just going to call it the no philosophy is any good attitude. And believe it or not, this attitude was also created and is still maintained at the hands of philosophers. It goes back all the way to the ancient sophists and skeptics. So let's take a look at Pyrrho, who is widely regarded as the father of ancient skepticism. Now, Pyrrho himself left no writings, but his student Timon describes his teachings as follows. Quote, Pyrrho reveals that things are equally indifferent and unstable and indeterminate. For this reason, neither our perceptions nor our beliefs tell the truth or lie. For this reason, then, we should not trust them, but should be without opinions and without inclinations and without wavering, saying about each single thing that it no more is than is not, or both is and is not, or neither is nor is not. Unquote. In other words, everything changes all the time. Therefore, neither our senses nor our thinking can tell us anything about things in the real world, and we should abdicate from all judgments or claims to knowledge. Another famous ancient skeptic was Sextus Empiricus, and he puts the same view as follows. From a book entitled Against the Learned, quote, But the most important point is that in putting forward skeptical slogans, the skeptic is saying what seems to him to be the case, and is reporting his pathos without belief, not firmly maintaining anything concerning what exists externally. This too is the way we approach the logical and ethical parts of so-called philosophy. So here you have philosophers who openly express their contempt for what they dismiss as a pretense of knowledge, any kind of knowledge, and who regard all judgments about what is real or unreal, true or false, good or evil, as erroneous. I hope you can see why such a view, if adopted, would lead people to reject philosophy as a waste of time. If knowledge is impossible, then so is philosophy. I always wonder why skeptics of this order bother to write books presenting reasons why reason is unreasonable or judging judgments to be unjustified. They never seem to grasp the self-refuting nature of their position. But to this day, no contradiction or inconsistency has ever stopped a devout skeptic from promoting his scorn for reason and philosophy. The best example from modern times is David Hume. Quote, It is not solely in poetry and music we must follow our taste and sentiment, but likewise in philosophy. When I am convinced of any principle, it is only an idea which strikes more strongly upon me. When I give the preference to one set of arguments above another, I do nothing but decide from my feeling concerning the superiority of their influence. What then can we look for from this confusion of groundless and extraordinary opinions, but error and falsehood? And how can we justify to ourselves any belief we repose in them." Unquote. Well, obviously we can't justify anything on this sort of view. In such a philosophy of arch skepticism and subjectivism, nobody can know anything. All knowledge, reasoning, science is just a matter of private feeling. But how can we live with all this doubt and uncertainty about everything? Hume recommends to simply ignore the conclusions of philosophy. Quote, "Carelessness and inattention alone can afford us any remedy. For this reason I rely entirely upon them." Unquote. Unfortunately, all this contempt for reason and philosophy has only gotten worse since the time of Hume, and it very much dominates today's universities and philosophy departments. Here is Ludwig Wittgenstein, a typical 20th century philosopher who taught for many years at the University of Cambridge, where he advised his students, quote, "Don't for heaven's sake be afraid of talking nonsense, but you must pay attention to your nonsense." Unquote. Or how about former Harvard philosophy professor Bertrand Drebin? Quote, "Philosophy is garbage, but the history of garbage is scholarship." Unquote. Can you imagine an expert from any other field taking a similar view of his line of work? What would you say to a plumber who arrived at your door and said, "I think so-called plumbing is all nonsense. What qualifies as a good or bad drainage system is just a matter of opinion. Nobody knows where the water really comes from, and one way of laying out the pipes is just as good as any other. So I'm just gonna do it how I feel like. But don't worry, there is no need to pay any attention to what I'm doing." Who could tolerate such an attitude, even for a second, never mind go along with it? Yet when we hear such statements expressed by philosophers, people tend to just accept it with a sigh or a shrug. Should you yourself share some of the "no philosophy is any good" or "all philosophy is good" attitudes, I would ask you to reconsider. And I hope these videos will help you in doing so. As I said before, there is a safe passage through this wilderness, but you will most likely get lost if you just go where most other people are going. That's attitude 1. You will also get lost if you think all paths lead in the right direction and are equally safe to travel upon. That's attitude 2. And you certainly will remain lost if you just sit down, give up, and start ridiculing every passerby for still trying to find the right way. And that's the third attitude. What then is the right attitude to take towards philosophy? How are we to approach the subject? Well, if both the "all philosophy is good" and "no philosophy is good" attitudes are equally senseless, there's really only one option left, namely that some philosophy is good. Just like there are some things that are good to eat, while most things aren't. But in order to determine what qualifies as a good philosophy, we have to go back to ancient Greece, to the men who discovered philosophy and science for the first time. And that's what we're going to do next week. So until then, thank you for your kind attention.